And I'm sure you've seen the images over the years. You've seen that ramp coming down on the LCVP, or in some cases a bigger transport like an LST. We're going to hear from a gentleman who was driving one of those LCVPs, trying to guide it to the shore. We're going to hear from someone who had to drive a truck off of an LST and saw some of in front of them going right into the water. That wasn't very reassuring. We're going to hear from a young man who was an engineer and had to go into the shores of Omaha Beach hours before the troops did, in the early morning hours of June 6th of '44. And maybe, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but when I hear these stories from all the veterans, there are a lot of them that kind of take my breath away and make me think, man, if I were in that situation, I think I'd be paralyzed by fear. I don't think I could have done anything. And imagine, if you can, jumping out of an airplane behind enemy lines in the dark of that fateful day, not knowing, not having any idea what was going to be waiting for you when you hit the ground. So those are the four perspectives that the gentlemen we're going to hear from today are coming from. And if you think about it, the magnitude of that day, a day that changed the world, that certainly changed that war. Just on the Normandy beaches alone, there were 73,000 American troops who came ashore that day. If you add up the British and Canadian troops, it was over 150,000. Just on that day alone, 2,500 Americans died. More than 3 times that number were wounded. If you look at the airborne casualties from that Normandy campaign, it's staggering. More than 2,000 paratroopers were killed over the weeks and months that followed, and many times that number were wounded. Almost that number were missing. So the guys that we're going to hear from today are the survivors. Many guys just like them never did make it home. They paid the price so that we could have this freedom to get together today. I mentioned those numbers from D-Day itself. How many of you know that lives were lost in the preparation for D-Day? And Dr. McCully witnessed something that was pretty severe. What do you remember about Operation Tiger at Slapton Sands? Can you tell these folks a little bit about what happened there and what you saw?
It was an exercise to prepare us for landing on the continent, but it boiled down to the fact that we had a convoy of 8 or 9 ships, including an attack transport, LSTs, and a large number of troops that were going to be put ashore in order to check out exactly how well that plan worked. Well, in that area, which was across the channel from France, in that area the Germans deployed E-boats, boats that were similar to our PT boats, but much more heavily armed and faster, really stronger boats. And they attacked this particular group of ships, and I was serving on on the main ship, which was the challenging ship. And we lost 2 LSTs and several hundred individuals in this landing before D-Day. But it was just a terrible, terrible beginning for a major operation.
And Clyde was in the Coast Guard at the time. He had joined the Coast Guard before the war started, thinking that's going to be some, pretty nice duty guarding the coastline. And then World War II happened, and they said, hey, Coast Guard, you're part of the Navy. You're with the 1st Infantry Division, 18th Infantry Regiment, and you were supposed to drive a vehicle off of an LST onto the beach?
Right, half-track ammunition carrier.
Mm-hmm. But the first time your LST tried to unload stuff, it didn't work out so well. Tell us what happened.
Well, the Navy would put down the anchor and go to the end and let the ramp down and say, get off. We had a big truckload of ammunition, got off, and he went completely under. We had to pull out again, told the Navy, you got to get us back in, and he got us back in the second time. We put some troops up there to jump down and check the water, and they went completely out. Went in for the 3rd time, but we told the commander if he didn't get us in this time, he goes overboard. So when he came in the 3rd time, I was the first off. And
were you a little nervous about that after what had just happened?
Yeah, I was, because the water looked pretty deep. And in fact, it come all the way up in the floorboard. But I made it off, got on the sand, and had to wait for my 4 artillery guns to get off. If they'd have got stranded in the water, I would have to tow them out. So I'm sitting there waiting for them to get off. And all the shelling going on. It was like 4th of July, everything. It was a lot of airburst. Wow. So the troops on the ship were going to ride on the barrels of the gun coming off of the water. Well, most of them got blown off and got run over and so forth when we got onto the beach.
What did it look like? What did it sound like and smell like there? Because I think that's what a lot of us trouble to grasp, how intense and how chaotic that was.
Pretty tough. A lot of bodies laying all over, a lot of ammunition flying. It was a bad deal, and there was one big ship that came in just the sight of us, and he was sitting in the sand, and just as I got my guns to start off the beach, that big ship blew up. But before we got off the LSD, I noticed where the big ship was, the troops were going down the ramp and getting off, and they go down a little ways and they fall in the water. You could walk down and fall in the water. So I talked to my commander and I got my binoculars out, and I saw a machine gun nest up there on the hill, right up on the corner to where the cemetery is now. And that machine gun guy was knocking all those troops off as soon as they go down the ramp. So we called a destroyer that was right around us. They come out and they spotted it. One shell went above, one went below, and pretty soon the gun and the guy was flying. But he knocked off a lot of people before we saw him.
But if you didn't see him, if you didn't grab those binoculars, there's probably a whole lot more Americans would have died.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Nobody else saw it, and if I hadn't saw it and did something about it, we'd have lost a lot more troops.
Where did you jump from your plane that day, and what did you find when you came down?
And when it come time to get out of the airplane, I realized the airplane was going pretty doggone fast. You usually get out at about 90 miles an hour. And we were whistling right along. Of course, we were getting anti-aircraft fire, small arms fire, this sort of thing. So when I went out the door, we were in our group standing up, shuffling to the door to bail out. And for some reason, I slipped and fell down in the door. Well, I was kind of hanging out, so I went out head first, and I caught the edge of the door with my left arm and kind of hung on for a few seconds, and then away I went. And a good portion, a lot of the troops lost everything they had on those jumps. They were going out, bailing out so fast that when the chutes opened, it just stripped them clean. All their gear, guns, ammunition, what have you. I guess me falling down, I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but it slowed things down enough that I didn't lose anything. But when I landed, there was this total dead silence. Black, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And the only person around, or the only company I had was a lonesome cow in this field. And I realized that every one of us were issued aerial maps, photographs of the area we're going to be in, so we knew where we had to go. Everybody was programmed for a separate destination where they landed. But I was nowhere near that. I was completely off the map. But I knew that the beach was north. So I started out by myself, headed for the beaches. It wasn't until almost daylight that I started running across paratroopers. And none of the people that run across, matter of fact, a lot of them weren't even from our outfit. They were from the 82nd, they were everybody. But being that everybody had been briefed, so to speak, of what the mission was going to be, you just automatically, well, if I'm in this area, this is the place they were supposed to go to attack this gun, this emplacement. So you headed that way. And when you finally, there was a group together, whatever you took over, the job you took over, you fought the war.
You were all winging it, right?
Right. When you think about it, the fact that so-called the troop carriers goofed up on us, it turned out to be a blessing because the Germans had no idea where we are, what we were doing, or what we were trying to do.
You're coming off a ship in rubber boats at what time in the morning on June 6th?
Around 1 o'clock in the morning, we had to be on the shore, put in our detonations, and get back to the ship before the minesweepers started. Everything was timed. Of course, it was all snafu'd, but it was timed.
So you guys had explosives in your pack that you were going to put where?
We had a 20-foot rubber raft with a Lee J engine. Now, Lee J engine is electric engine that makes no noise at all. We went to shore and we were putting our explosives in places so the tanks could make it ashore to build a road eventually. When we got in there, we could hear the Germans speaking. Every once in a while, their voice would carry. And we finished the job in about 45 minutes, and I headed that rubber raft back, and here was 1,000 ships. And which one do we go to? I want to tell you that was a heart-throbbing story. For a moment, we got on board. And then the next time at 10 o'clock in the morning, I drove a 6x6 on shore. You couldn't see. The dust and the smoke was so bad, and it filled your eyes till you couldn't, it just ran. Your eyes ran with water. There were bodies laying everywhere, parts and pieces. The sea was red with blood. I drove up into a little ravine that I heard about today where someone else had been up in the same area as I. I stopped the truck and the lieutenant said, "We have 3 bunkers that have to be blown up by hand." He brought 4 or 5 of my original crew up, and we crawled on our stomachs in behind these Viter Stanisters. If you haven't seen one, you should try. They're about 12 feet thick, and the Germans actually lived in them. Now, there was a slit across the front, and they had automatic rifles in there on chain drives, and they would sweep back and forth across the beach so that when our men came through, they just automatically got mowed down, not by a German, but by an automatic gun. Now, there were snipers in there also, but I want to tell you that we blew those doors open, and the 1340th drove in there and cleaned them all out. I have to say this about our war, and I say ours, anybody that lived at that time, men, women, and children, were all ready to go to work on Hitler. He had devastated the world in Europe beyond recognition. When I unloaded in Liverpool, the buildings were all devastated in Europe. We stood in line and wondered how these people had survived this long. I want to say it's a hooray for those people that saved our butt before we got there. But I wouldn't want to repeat that job. I wouldn't want to repeat it. I did stay with my outfit for 7 months until the Battle of the Bulge, and I have 18 holes in my back to prove that. I stayed in the French hospital for 3 months before they sent me back home, rehabilitated me, and so that's why I'm here today. And I thank you all for coming.